All right. Hi, my name is Andrew Bretherton. I am head winemaker at Juniper Estate, and this is Meet the Masters.
Hello, my name's Tom Hill. I'm CEO at Juniper Estate and second generation with the business. This is Meet the Masters. Juniper was hatched in kind of 1997, and then the vineyard purchased in 1998. So my dad Roger and my mum Jill and a business partner of theirs were looking for a small plot of land to make premium Margaret River Cabernet. That was the intention then and remains the intention today. And they found this plot that was planted in 1973 opposite Vas Felix. Vas Felix is the founding wine business in Margaret River, founding vineyard, and where the vineyard that we purchased is sort of a football kick across the road. So the dirt was really good. It was old vine, 25 years at that point, planted in 1973, and that became the focus of this business. And having these old vines in a beautiful part of Margaret River in Williabra, and with a real kind of sort of runs on the board as far as age go in a pretty young region. So that was a big tick as far as setting us on our path. And we always wanted to be a self-sustaining model. So growing everything we make and making everything we grow. And so in 2006, we bought a southern vineyard in Carrydale, and that formed the basis of our white wine program, specifically Chardonnay. But since then, there's been Sauvignon Blanc and some Fiano planted. And that complemented the Williabrup vineyard, which was about 85% red wine. Cabernet, a bit of Shiraz, a little bit of Bordeaux varieties, some of which I planted back in 1999, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Merlot, Cabernet Franc. So we had this lovely sort of framework to make great Cabernet and wanted to make great Chardonnay as well. And Carrydale being 40 kilometres further south, where there's greater influence from the Southern and Indian Oceans, made it a good spot for that. And you've got other producers down there like Lewin Estate, which is a bit further north, but Xanadu are making lovely Chardonnay, Voyager are making some lovely Chardonnay, Devil's Lair as well. So it was a good part of the world. And then finally in 2008, we added to that with our Metricup vineyard, which is back up the highway closer to where the estate is, Juniper Estate is. And that was more about our what became our Three Fields range. So this sort of juicy, more accessible style of Cabernet, younger vines, but planted really precisely to one day with vine age be as good as the original vineyard. So that has really set the picture for us, and being this model that we can control almost in an obsessive way the quality of vineyard, and giving the winemakers the best possible chance to make great wine. I think that's kind of everyone's goal, but our philosophy of having control of these vineyards really sort of formed the basis of this obsession.
So what's one thing that you never compromise when it comes to expressing the place that you're from, to the winemaking, to the viticulture?
I think you've got to put all your efforts into the vineyard. You know, the thing you can't compromise in is looking after the land and looking after the vines. You know, there's lots of things you can do, oak and things you can do in the winery sorting. But if you're out in the vineyard and really, you know, putting all your energy into that, making sure you're selecting and picking little parcels when they're perfectly ripe, that's how you get the best wine.
And Margaret River is famous for both Cabernet and Chardonnay in the focus, but we do have a lot of other grapes like Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc and stuff like this. What is the most difficult grape to approach in your region?
Look, I think Cabernet is one of the trickiest varieties to grow and make. You know, we're blessed. We're in a beautiful, you know, sort of Mediterranean, maritime climate. So we have this, you know, lovely, long, mild autumn in typical years. And that helps us to hang the fruit on the vine for a little bit longer, really ripen those tannins, which is really important for Cabernet, and just slowly develop those perfumes. But it's a long journey all the way out till, you're getting sort of mid-April when we're picking Cabernet, and you can start to get some weather, some rain. The temperature doesn't always do what you want at that time of the year. So getting Cabernet to be beautifully perfumed, elegant, fine, really ripe tannin is probably always the trickiest, I think, to get right.
And how do you manage vintage variability and keep the consistency in the wines?
It's a very good question. I think, part of it is the dirt, especially old vines like those, the original Cabernet vines are 1973, so over 50 years old now. 2024, we had a really dry year, the driest on record in Margaret River, and this is also an unirrigated vineyard. So dry grown, deep roots, they're deep in a bed of clay underneath the gravels. So, counterintuitively, the dry grown vineyard looked like the most resilient in that super dry year, and it was the one we didn't give a drink to, didn't get any water. So that really helps in the vintage variation, the different weather that you get. Those old vines just know the place, they're used to the seasons, they know it's a dry kind of climate, and they don't sort of vary as much as the younger vines.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when it comes to regenerative farming, cover cropping, organic methods, do you see that as more of a scientifically proven method for viticulture, or is it part of a more ideological aspect?
It's a good question. My counterpart Yanto, he's a viticulturalist and very scientific, and I think he would say it's a scientific. You can measure the kind of the soil microbiome and see that it's healthier and it's growing. For me, it's all about wine quality, healthy vines, depth of flavour, complexity and balance. And I think you see that when you have alive soils. There's a lot of life down there beneath our feet, and if you're really nurturing that, the vines are healthy, they can access more nutrients, and you just have better fruit, more complex wines.
And can the consumer usually recognize the difference between the two?
It's a very good question. I think, for us, it's just about the one percenters. Talking in Australia a lot about in sport, but in wine, these little 1% things, you can make really good wine, but you just keep tweaking these 1%ers and you keep making better wine. So whether they could tell the difference between, there's so many other variables, weather, your site, your vine age, how you manage. So whether they could tell the difference, but hopefully if you're making the most expressive, beautiful wine you can, that's enough.
And I think philosophically, which is less scientific, but kind of, I think the philosophy sort of is informed by the science in a way, is that we feel a responsibility to the place and a responsibility to make great wine, have a sustainable business first and foremost, but have an approach that leaves the place in better nick than when we found it. And we'd love to be a business that is around in 100 years' time and have done it in a way that's not necessarily the path of least resistance, but in a way that we can look back and say, look, this place is got biodiversity, and it's healthy, and the soil's healthy, the vines are healthy, the wines have never looked better. So we sort of treat the dirt, the soil, a bit like a bank account. So we put in a lot of work to throughout the year, whether it's pruning, whether it's cover crops, fertilization programs, whatever it is. And then there's one withdrawal at vintage time of hopefully beautiful fruit. Now the bank account analogy goes a little bit off the rails because you're taking out more money throughout the year, and that's right, yeah, exactly. Well, that's the idea, right? Like you make your deposit, and then you have this opportunity to take the fruits of your literal fruits of your labour and withdraw those. So there's a scientific basis for it, but there's, I think, a philosophy in our business that we want to just stand for something and be better about how we do it, and hopefully in a way that will translate to the consumers, not in a way that we really feel the need to jam it down people's throat, but it's something that just we try to embody, basically, is how we approach the vineyard.
And if somebody tasted, let's say, a vertical of 20 years of Juniper estate wines, would they see an evolution of vineyard practices or maybe stylistic changes?
Yeah, I think they would. I think particularly with Cabernet, what you do see is a common thread of sort of this earthiness and this real terroir, for want of a better Australian expression. You see this earthiness and this sort of saline character through those wines. In different eras, there's probably a little bit more extraction. 20 years ago, where people wanted Cabernet that was, very structured and meant to age. I think as you lead up until now, you're looking at more, subtlety in that extraction and those oak programs, and a real focus on the fruit. And with these mature vines, you just get that complexity. So that's sort of the hero in the current style of Juniper Cabernet.
And do you have any trouble with climate change in your area?
Well, I think everyone's got, there's definitely some things going on, and that, as I said, in 2024, that was the driest season we've had. I think from October to May, we had around 20 mils of rain, and so average is more like probably 200.
Yeah.
So it was really dry. It scared a lot of people. There were old growth trees that were dying, essentially. So that was really scary. And you either have to have a good water resource or old vines, dry grown but old vines. So it's definitely changing how people think, and you've got to be really, things like just shading the fruit, keeping really lovely leaf cover so it's dappled light. You're minimising that UV on the fruit is really important in a hot, dry year, because you don't want to cook it, and you still want that lovely perfume and typicity of the site. Whereas in other years, you'd remove leaves maybe on the morning side, just cover it up on the western side where that afternoon sun hits. So it makes us think a little bit differently about, well, maybe we don't have the option in that hot, dry year to open up the eastern side, nor do we need to. So you've got to try to be adaptive and rethink all your choices. For me, viticulture and winemaking is a lot of little choices along the way, which kind of creates your style, and you've got to constantly be evolving it and thinking about it in each season.
Well, when you mentioned evolving, how do you stay relevant in a competitive market, especially in Margaret River, where a lot of people know about not just Juniper Estate, but like you mentioned, West Felix, William Estate, Cullen. Do you separate yourself by style or by progressive business ideas, or?
I think a bit of both. I think when our previous winemaker stepped aside before we found Andy, I thought, what is our point of difference here, and is our point of difference tied up in the equity and the kind of the legacy of someone that had been with the business for 25 years. And I think there's, of course, loyalists to Juniper that loved Mark's wines, and I think you're going to learn to love Andy's wines. So I think it's about being consistent first and foremost in your wines and your storytelling. But I think ultimately it's what people connect with, and what I feel like we can be known for is the sort of the intersection between what we're passionate about, what we feel we're best at, and kind of what there's opportunity for in Margaret River. And I think the point of the intersection there is around our customer service and around our cellar door experience. And that is certainly an evolution, but it's about seeing people eye to eye with the way they like to drink wine. And sometimes I think wine businesses and winemakers, we can get caught talking to ourselves a lot rather than talking to the people that are actually going to buy the wine and spread the word, hopefully. So it's about kind of letting them drink like no one's watching, in a way, not telling them, being prescriptive about how you have to drink wine or prescriptive about what you have to taste in the wine. And I think communication is a really important part, especially with everything you hear in the industry about the next generation not drinking as much. and they're not engaging with wine as much. Well, I feel like the impetus is on us to create that engagement. So I think it's around that for us, is that real engagement with consumers in a way that's relatable and accessible. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, I think just that other thing of, estate grown, being a sort of house. We have, we're not shopping around for fruit. We have our vineyards that we manage. We're committed to looking after them, looking after the dirt, and slowly evolving that, and just really tweaking it to keep lifting the quality on what we own. So there's not many sort of estate grown houses our size, small and focused in Margaret River. And I think that's where we've got to keep telling the story. But it's a really compelling story, that commitment and that, control of these great patches in Margaret River.
When you took over the role of the winemaker in Juniper Estate, what was your biggest challenge to kind of fit in the shoes of somebody that was there for 25 years? And what do you see your style evolving into within the estate?
For me, the challenge is Mark was there for 25 years, so a lot of the choices, the reasons why are with Mark. They're up in his head, and we did a lot of we tasted it a lot together and asked him a lot, peppered him with a lot of questions. But that experience and what he saw over every season, you can't just take that experience. So being in the role, trying to feel out the people, because it's people who make wine, and that culture and how the team works together is really important. It's not just the vineyards. So getting to know the people, getting to just be in the winery, walking the vineyards and seeing how the fruit turns out. Because what I did at my last place, choices and ways I make wine might not work with these vineyards. So in a way, trying to do it the way that I like to make wine and what feels right, but then trying to sit in Mark's shoes in this winery and work out why they did things. So it wasn't changing things immediately. It was, all right, well, what do you guys do? Let's try it. Let's see, do I like it? Do I not like it? When I felt there was a tweak to be made, we'd tweak it. So that's probably the challenge, is to really try to understand what's happened up until now so you can kind of evolve it in a meaningful way.
What is the best decision that you made in a vineyard or winery that just made you go, this is my path, this is what I want to do?
That's a very good question. because I think it's not about really big things. It's about lots of little things, and just tweaking slowly. So, one thing with Chardonnay, for example, is that there was a fair bit of batonnage in the wines, to build texture and build weight. And I'm less of a fan of that. I want the fruit purity to be the focus of Chardonnay. And then you can use, I'd sulfur them later, so you can use those kind of fine lees up in suspension to build texture. But then I think you hold on to the fruit purity and the vineyard essence a bit more. So that's probably just one little tweak, but it takes the wine in a very different direction while still holding the kind of vineyard essence true. So that's an example of where I think it's just these little decisions that can take it in a very different path.
I was actually talking to Julian from Nocturne yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
About this exact same thing, and he was saying, literally that technique is what he wants in his wine as well. He wants that purity of fruit,
Yep.
a little bit of winemaking just in the background.
That's interesting, because I worked with Julian before. It also helps if you've got funky wines, which Margaret River does get this lovely reduction, this sea spray kind of, and you see that in those Nocturne wines. Yeah. If you're sulfuring them really early, they're a bit ajar with the wine. They're not as integrated, and I'm sure you talked with Julian about that. But you let these whatever characters are in the wine, the oak, the funk, they all kind of meld together when it's unsulfured. It goes on a little journey of piecing itself together, rather than trying to sulfur it and then work on it after that.
Exactly.
You need to, when you sulfur it, that's the wine, and that's you've got to let it slowly evolve on its own. Yeah. So we definitely we have slightly different styles. We'll make really different wines, but we definitely have that in common. I reckon we love that process.
Did you ever fuck up anything in the winery?
Always. Back in the day when I was a young cellar hand, back at in the Yarra Valley, we had this little room called the Bat Cave, where we had all the stillage barrels. were making Chardonnay in there, and you're so busy, you know, we'd hoon in and out with the forklift, and I couldn't find one, so I ran up to the crush pad, grabbed this forklift, and had this huge mast right up high. So the back cave was a little concrete cave, and I was, you know, racing around, hooned in, and everyone was around, and all I heard was AB, which is my nickname, and I just hit the brakes and slammed into these big copper hot water pipes, so I could, you know, essentially try to drive into the building rather than in and under it. And the maintenance guy said, "Can you fix those up?" They were dinged but not broken. I said, "Can you fix that up?" He said, No, they're staying there. That's
Reminder.
That's a reminder of
Yeah.
not to take. So, and I think someone wrote on it, you know, AB was here.
Yeah.
They fixed it 2 years ago, and I got a text from a friend saying your greatest moment at the De Bortley winery is now being erased from history.
Wow.
I was there for about 12 years as a constant reminder of my fuck up in the winery.
What are some other grape varieties, both from a viticultural perspective, but also from a business perspective, that work for you guys?
We're finding some really good success in the alternative. They're called alternative varieties, but it's up to the consumer to decide how alternative they are. But Fiano, Tempranillo, Malbec specifically, and we're finding that Margaret River is such a sympathetic place to grow grapes, and it allows for a myriad of styles and a myriad of varieties to grow successfully. And we're not bound by having to grow certain, just certain varieties. So it gives flexibility in as much as how we look to storytell. And I think our focus and the journey we want you to come on with Juniper is heavily focused around Chardonnay and Cabernet. And that's evident by the vineyards we bought. But what we've found within those vineyards is the ability to grow things like Tempranillo and Fiano down at our Carradale site. And they're lovely and fresh and drinkable. And I know that's sort of self-fulfilling with wine, that it needs to be drinkable, but they're gluggable in a way. They're open on a Tuesday night, drink with abandon, don't fret too much about how the style is or, what you're tasting. It's about them being engaging wines that are a bit playful and outside of the kind of the set of Margaret River classics, but they have that DNA of Margaret River in them. And we've found that Fiano particularly is really sort of filling a niche where maybe SSB used to, as that kind of first drink, hot summer's day. They're just bloody delicious wines. And I think that's kind of the idea with that range, is that people are just picking them up and getting stuck in.
Mm. And from a viticultural perspective, it works in Margaret River to plant like Fiano, Malbec.
Yeah, well, I guess Malbec was from Bordeaux before it was Argentinian. So, it is that kind of maritime climate. It works well. And we're drier than, Malbec can be a hard one to grow as well, but we're drier than, say, Bordeaux through that summer period and that ripening period. So it doesn't have the same problems. And it's such a lovely variety for that kind of style that people love to drink, which is drink it young, uncomplicated by oak. We put it in big old oak for 3 months just to mature it and settle it down. But I want fruit purity and perfume and violets, and then that fleshy, softly structured style. And you can do that really well in Margaret River in particular. Fiano holds its acidity. It's quite a late ripener. And look, truth be told, most wines hold their acidity in Margaret River, which is why it's such a great region. So it's in a really sympathetic to food, a fresh kind of saline sort of style. So they're both really good varieties in Margaret River.
I think Malbec its history in Margaret River is pretty storied as well, as far as being a variety that was there in the early blends across the road from us. Vas Felix have sort of championed Malbec for a long time, having it on their label, I think, from the first vintage. I might be corrected there, but it's a variety that's been kind of lurking in the shadows a bit, waiting for its moment, from both a winemaking perspective to sort of, stand on its own 2 feet as a varietal, and also consumers to take notice of it. And I think a lot of that consumer notice has come via Argentinian Malbecs, but they're starting to see that homegrown Malbecs can be good and juicy and, ticking the boxes, which is exciting.
Good stuff. We're going to go a little bit more into the business perspective now. What is the most difficult decision that you learned in running Juniper Estate, from a perspective of distribution, finding new distributors, finding new importers, packaging, and what that decision teach you about the business?
It is a lot of, as Andy said, with winemaking, it's a lot of little decisions over time rather than kind of one big bang kind of thing, a lightning bolt. I think the biggest thing for me is, why do people care? From the outside perspective, why do people care about what you're doing specifically? There's lots of good wine out there, and I think it's about editing and evolving in a way to keep your existing consumer base and the consumer base that helped you to become to have some sort of salience in the industry, and then how you bring in new consumers. I think that's the constant thread. Of course, within that, there's how you distribute, and who you distribute with is always a pressing matter, because you're one of maybe a portfolio of 50 or 60 brands, and that's hard to get attention. That's hard to be that wine that's in the cooler bag that gets taken to the nice restaurant. So yeah, it's about, for us, it's been about a lot around the communication and knowing who we are. And I'd say that's still a work in progress, even after 27 years. Kind of, you're always editing who you are and how that's viewed from the outside. But if we can talk to the right customer and have a real focus on who we are speaking to, I think that becomes the kind of the easier battle, and we end up not having to speak to everyone, because we don't have enough wine for everyone to drink anyway. So let's focus it hard. So I'd say that's it. And once we are focused, well, why do they want to keep coming back to us? Because there's such a big, wonderful world of wine out there with so much beautiful wine. And I categorize ours in that as well, but it's around the storytelling with that for consumers a lot of the time, and why they want to kind of hook their wagon to someone like Juniper. That's been the consistent thing. Human resources is always a thing. We don't need to go into that, but distribution, human resources, making sure we have, the vineyard is performing is another thing. But overall, it's getting the wine into people's hands is the thing.
So I have two questions to tie on that. When you mentioned that your brand is developing through storytelling, do you think that type of storytelling, especially in a digital age, can outweigh the scores that were pretty much a leader in the storytelling business 10 years ago?
Look, I think they're important still, probably to a lesser degree. I think they helped and probably continue to help build the salience of some brands. And as was the case with us, probably sort of 10 or 15 years ago. We had some success at Melbourne. We had, I think, Wine and Spirits magazine in the US said we were the best Cabernet of the year for them. But you can't live on those things forever. And if you're going down that route, you've got to be consistent and, sort of continue to build that. So I'd say that not everyone will notice specifically, but it's a sort of there's an undercurrent that you need that stuff to create a bit of hype. for the right people who are then potentially the gatekeepers for the people that will buy and hopefully continue to enjoy and become sticky customers, that want to come back. So I think there's an element of it, but I'd say it's got less impact than maybe 10 years ago.
It's about the generation too, right? Like who are you speaking to? The people who kids have left home and they've been supporting Juniper for 25 years. They'll look at those reviews and respect that. And then you've got the up and coming people who they care about wine, but they want it to be fun. They want to have fun. They want to know a bit about you, your dirt, and your sustainability, and what you stand for, not just what that dude think it tastes like or that writer think it tastes like. What are you about as people?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And nowadays, with whatever is happening in the world with financial tension and politics and war and whatever, people are always scared to spend money on things that they don't really know about. And if you give them like a tech sheet about your wine, they don't necessarily say, "Oh yeah, that's great, I'm gonna buy a bottle." It's more of a like, who are you as people, like you said, and what are they going to get by drinking your wine? So it's kind of like speaking to the younger generation rather than
yes,
younger generation.
Yeah,
sure.
And when it comes to sommeliers and distributors or the market, especially in the markets where you export, like what is important for you what kind of message should they carry towards the general consumer?
I think in the export markets we look at, which are a few really. It's not a big footprint there. It's Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Vietnam's recent, and then Sweden really. These markets value, I think, boutiqueness and the fact that we've been family owned for 27 years and someone from the family currently runs the business. I think that we're artisan and that this is real craft. So access to the winemaker in that regard and hearing from the people that have boots on the ground and are bringing these wines into existence, I think is really important. It's not just a salesperson. Basically, when you speak to anyone from the business, it's someone that's either involved in the production or part of the family. So I think that becomes our story, and then around that is how's our style evolving, and I think sort of creating a bit of anticipation with this next point we're in, which is a sort of a great point in our history of changing from the only winemaker we ever had to the second act, and seeing those wines come to life and the interpretation of the winemaker on the fruit that we've been producing.
Great wine is unique. There's a sense of place, discerns itself from just being a well-made wine with fruit and balance and things. Like there's a real uniqueness and special character. When you try Margaret River wine, it tastes like Margaret River. And so from that point of view, in these places which maybe don't get to experience it and live in it like we do, that's a challenge. But getting across how unique the place and the wines are, I think is really important for our region.
I like how you mentioned when you taste the wines, they're really Margaret River.
Yeah.
But still, there are a lot of consumers today in the world that when they try any kind of wine that's not French, they would compare it to Bordeaux or Burgundy or Loire or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you react to somebody tasting your wine, which is a great Cabernet or great Chardonnay from Margaret River, and saying, "Oh yeah, this tastes like Bordeaux," or doesn't taste like Bordeaux, whatever?
Yeah, it's probably partly our fault as Australians, because we're always comparing. We're a young country and young winemaking industry, like dry reds started in the 50s, really, with that Penfold story. So we haven't been making, we've been evolving quickly, but, we have been comparing ourselves to these older French wines. And, it's up to us to grow up a bit and not refer back to it. They're not Bordeaux blends, they're Margaret River blends.
Yeah.
I think, and that takes time. So I don't think, it can be frustrating, but I don't think it's the consumer's fault. I think it's just how the new world's tried to build its reputation by sort of comparing it to the old world.
Yeah, and then it takes a long stretch of years to reset that.
Absolutely, and it takes some maturity, to just get to this place. Mug River's over 50 years old now. We're a mature industry with really smart winemakers and great vine material. So it does take time, but we've got to just talk about our wines, not talk about them and how different they are from other ones.
And when it comes to any influences, either from Australia or from any other country in the world, do you have anybody that you're influenced by in sense of style, or somebody's wines that you like to drink, and then you say, "Oh, I wanna kind of implement that into my winemaking"?
I mean, it was great to do this Fin Expo this week because a lot of the time I just left Tom at the store while I hunted around and tried to find delicious bottles, and there was some beautiful young Bordeaux that we tried, 21s, 22s, and their style, there's freshness, there's bright fruit, they're not over extracted, over oaked. It was the second wine of Vega Sicilia, Tempranillo, that was beautiful, silky, and just the purity of fruit. So, Lieve Las from Bordeaux is my favourite wine there because, they're just really focused on the detail of the perfume and the harmony in the wine. So I guess that's what inspires me in wine, and it can be from lots of different parts of the world. But that purity and that subtlety and that balance in the wine is what appeals to me. It is. But, Alla Barolo as well, which is another wine which, it's focused on acid and tannin, and you've got to be really careful and do that really well for them to be beautiful, because if you've got a variety that's about acid, tannin, and tension in the wine, it's got to be beautifully balanced. You've got to get those tannins perfectly ripe, and the acid's got to be perfectly ripe and integrated as well. So they're tricky wines, but when they're great, they're just such a pleasure and a real kind of thinking man, like a real cerebral thinking human being's drink. Like it just triggers a lot of thoughts for me.
Thanks for coming by and Meet the Masters. It was a great conversation as always. A lot of great insights about Western Australia and about your work. So, any last words you have before you get the coffee? Or
thanks for having us. Thanks for the laksa. Thanks for the pork liver. It was a beautiful eating experience in Singapore. We love being here.
Yeah, great town, and I think keep an eye out for wines from Western Australia.